I really feel very privileged to be invited. That was a big surprise for me, and thank you very much. As to my, when I started my medical career, it was in 1975. That means half a century ago. So probably half of my audience here haven't even been born by that time. I saw many invasive bacterial infections, among them Hib meningitis, sepsis, epiglottitis cases in our hospital, the Hospital for Infectious Diseases. Unfortunately, at that time, our public health network only collected data on invasive meningococcal diseases. So when we learned about the conjugated Hib vaccine development and a couple of years later the licensure of it, then we had to realize that we have no idea about the disease burden, the Hib disease burden. So the problem was, how could we force our public health to implement a Hib vaccine into our NIP without any local data on epidemiology? It was a very, very different time. If you wanted to learn something new, you had to actually go to a library and to ask for a printed journal, which you could, of course, read. You could use the landline. There were no mobile phones. Is there anyone here who doesn't have a mobile phone? And we wrote our patients' reports on a typewriter with indigo sheets. And if we wanted to get into contact with each other, then we had the post or we had to visit the person in person. So the first step was how to find where could the Hib patients been treated. There was already a National Institute of Infant and Child Health due to these two distinguished professors, Professor Kerper-Fronius and Professor Dezső-Schuller. And they had a registry of all departments and wards where children can be treated. I learned that there are altogether 106 of them, scattered all over the country. So the next step was to compose a letter and send it to all these centers. I even enclosed the chart and a return envelope with a stamp addressed to our department to make sure. And I asked them to fill out the chart about suppurative meningitis cases below the age of 14 who were treated between a 5 calendar year period, 83-87, the age, the etiology, and the outcome of this. And my professor, Professor Gábor Nyerges, supported me in this fight. Much to my surprise, within 2 to 3 weeks, already 76 of them returned our chart, but 30 did not. So I had to keep on calling and calling them on the landline and begging for data. And I ended up with 96 responses, and only 10 were who did not send data because they were very small ones and very specialized ones. So it was very unlikely that patients could have been treated there for suppurative meningitis. And the results were published in the #1 medical journal. And when I was preparing for this lecture, I was happy to see it on PubMed. So it really appeared in 1989. For the sake of time, I'm just now discussing the Hib results out of this survey. We could collect during this 5-year period 175 Hib cases, nearly 10% lethality, and just about thrice as many who had sequelae. The real figure is probably a bit higher because altogether 1,200 something cases, 360, no etiological diagnosis was established, so there must be some Hib cases even among those. Well, I was very happy with this publication, and I took it to the #1 public health officer. She was a very strict lady, and she looked at my paper and said that this data collection is methodologically amateurish and unprofessional. Well, my response was that it could be, but nevertheless, they are real children because each of them was treated by a pediatrician who signed the chart and they were responsible for the treatment. So they should be perhaps the real disease burden in this respect. Nevertheless, Hib vaccines were already available in the pharmacies, but not in the NIP. So me with my colleagues went all over the country to give lectures to pediatricians and GPs about the significance of our hip prevention. And we tried publications, but all of our efforts were in vain. Just about 40% of the children were vaccinated, but it was not enough for a measurable efficacy on etiology. And then a new paper, Blick, appeared in Hungary, and then unexpected help came from that. A reporter came to the hospital, and I was permitted to give an interview. I never in my life thought that the next day the paper will appear with the shocking title that 5 little souls already dead, killer bacteria got loose in St. Laszlo Hospital. Well, I was nearly kicked out of my job because of this. Because it was not a nosocomial infection, that I was summoned to the health ministry, to the public health, everywhere. But the paper was so popular that it got into the media, and therefore hip vaccine got into voluntary basis, first to the NIP, then in 1999 it became a hip vaccine. So it took a 10 years persistence, so my take-home message is for my young colleagues that be alert and watch your patients with open eyes, like this road sign from India says. Notice if a long ago used guideline needs updating when there is a medical need. And who knows, if you are successful, you might even be invited to a future Forgotten Wisdom session. Thank you.